Okay, hello. Welcome to the Dev Talk Show. Today is Wednesday, March 2nd. Wow, March 2nd already, 2022. And we are back for another great episode of the Dev Talk Show. Now, you might notice something a little different on the screen here. I am here as usual with co hosts, the three of us, Chris Gomez and Rich Ross. And on the top right, we've got Brian Manisi, friend of the show. He's been with us before, and we all know Brian from the Philadelphia, .NET community for gosh, many years now at this point. It'd be interesting. We could go back and maybe we'll talk about that in a minute and figure out how long we've all known each other. But Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm very happy to be here.
It, well, thanks. We're glad to have you back for a show. We know you're going to bring some great insights on the topics you talk about, and when it comes to DevOps related stuff, Brian, you're always the guy. So it's great to have you here. Rich, how are you doing this week?
I'm good, Andy. It's been a good week. So yeah, happy we're all able to fit us all in, so to speak, in the screen here. Chris has been doing some great magic behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true, right? And so I'm not even going to go to Chris. Well, he's smiling, so maybe Chris is ready. How are you, Chris?
Oh, hanging in there. Just, last minute, like, hey, how can we, this is why people have producers, right? So that they can, this is why they have interns, so they can set the show up and test it out. But we tested it for a little bit, and I think we're live, and I think we're transmitting with audio and everything, but you'll have to let us know if you hear anything out there. We got a hi from Dark Elder, who thanks for joining us, and it is Happy Wednesday, and we're back. So,
yeah, here we are with another great show. Yeah, I guess what we missed last week. Apologies to anybody who was going to be around, but sometimes we have too many conflicts. We can do it if one of us is out. If two of us is out, it gets kind of rough. So we try to keep it running, and we think we do generally a pretty good job. We've had some great talks lately. Maybe it kind of relates into this a little bit, but we were talking about GitHub, well, Git in general, right? A couple weeks ago, Chris was sharing the knowledge, because Chris really knows his stuff with Git, and that was a fun show. I think I learned a lot on that one. What I need to do is take those Git shows that we do, like, when Chris is dropping nuggets of knowledge down there, right? I need to just bookmark those, and I need to watch those like once a week. I should start out Monday morning rewatching Chris's Git shows, because I don't know why I have a hard time like remembering that stuff, like bringing that stuff back. I don't know why, but like I need to start watching those things weekly and getting myself ready. What do you think, Chris? Can we do replays? Maybe we should replay the show.
Just replay the Git show for you when you get to work, you can hit a button, and we'll say for Andy at the top of the stream.
No, other people could watch. I wouldn't limit it exclusively for me, right?
Okay,
sure. But, like reruns.
Reruns, yeah. You can do reruns, can't you?
Yeah. Well, next week we are actually planning to get back to it, right? We because we didn't get nearly as far as we thought we would, and we didn't discuss some pretty we didn't discuss anything about like merging or conflicts, and that can drive people crazy. So that's next week.
Yeah, Brian, we were doing a show, like, Chris was basically bringing up like, sort of problem scenarios that you might run into and how to work around those in Git. And I think we only got through like one scenario in like an hour and a half, because there was so much conversation, right? There was so much interesting. Well, hey, let's try this. Let's try that. We really got into it. So we've got a scheduled part 2 for next Wednesday, and that's going to be great. So hope everyone will join us next Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, Twitch on YouTube, and we'll be having more fun with Git. And that'll be great. Beyond Here Lies Nothing says, do you have a VOD link for the last one? Yes, we should have a link for the last one, to the YouTube channel.
I'll find it and post it.
I think, Yeah, I think Rich is going to go ahead and grab that, and we'll put that up there. Thanks. It's a great idea. Beyond Here Lies Nothing. We need see this is great, right? This is it's a community, and we love help from people. We should have thought like let's lead in with that. Let's post that link. I just started talking about it, but we're not like great marketing experts, right? We should always post last week's link. Maybe we should make that a regular thing. Like hey, if you missed last week's
today is
show,
Wednesday.
here's the link. Oh, I hear that. I heard my voice in the background. So anyway,
Yeah, that was a mistake on my
Brian,
part.
you're with us today. So Brian, we know you, as I said earlier, we know you from, Philly.net and the Philly community. Several of us are MVPs, and so we're sort of in that club together. And of course, you and I, we're running, Tech Bash for, a couple of years, doing a conference. So we've got a lot of like interwoven history. Anything you want to introduce yourself? Something you're working on, or anything cool, or you got some talks coming up, right?
Yes, on Friday, the Philly.net Code Camp. I hope everybody has signed up for that. There are going to be a lot of great talks there. And I will be presenting two things. One is going to be on ACR and AKS, which is Azure Container Registry and Kubernetes services. And the other one's going to be on Azure Bicep, which I think we talked about the last time I was on.
Yeah, that was the last show you did with us.
Yeah, what was that? I wonder when that was. We could get a VOD link up for that one too while we're at it, I think, right?
I'm on it.
And I see it looks like Chris switched us over, and we can see Brian's Bicep talk coming up. That's this Friday, right? Code Camp is this Friday?
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow. Boy, that came up quick.
It is.
And people can still register for that. Philly Code Camp it's historic. I don't remember now, but I saw the email Bill sent out, and it says something like coming up is our nth Code Camp, and I think it wasn't 30, was it? I don't know.
30, 31.
Over 30.
Over 30. Wow, right? All these different code camps. And I don't know. So I'm sure people can still register for Philly.net Code Camp on their meetup site, which I believe is meetup.com/Philly-net. Yeah. So a little weird, kind of like ours is a little weird too, but sign up for Code Camp. Come check that out. Bill Wolf always puts together a good program. And Brian's going to be talking about, Bicep, which we talked about. There's the site there, Code Camp 2022. We talked about Bicep. Could it be a year ago? I don't know.
It was about a year ago, yeah. I don't think it was even in production at that
11
time.
months ago on March 10th.
Wow, there we go.
Okay.
And Bicep is a cool product. Why don't you take 30 seconds, explain Bicep to people?
Sure. So everybody who knows ARM templates knows that is a way to automate Azure resources. It is a JSON format, and even though some people say it's declarative in nature, it isn't. It's very difficult to work with. You really have to know the syntax inside and out. So you have these products like Terraform come out, which was more of a YAML structure, and it was much easier to work with. So Azure Bicep was the answer to a more easy way to do the resource automation within Azure. So it's a Python type of language. It's not Python, but it's sort of like Python. It's a declarative language, and it's pretty easy to work with, and it does a really good job. So there are a couple ways you can run it. If you compile a Bicep file, it compiles down to an ARM template, and you could just deploy that ARM template, or you could use the PowerShell connlets to do a deploy a Bicep, and you could just point it straight to the Bicep file. So behind the scenes, it probably does something like compile it into an ARM template and then pass in the parameters. But there are a couple of different ways that you can actually run those things. And it has a lot of power. You have the for loops, you have copy, you have a lot of things that you were able to do in ARM templates, but it's kind of difficult to do. So the syntax is much, much cleaner than an ARM template, to the point where it's shocking how much easier it is to work with.
Yeah.
And as far as getting to know how to use Bicep as a syntax, it has a very low learning curve. Of course, the big learning curve is understanding Azure and how resources are created and all the things you have to go through to do that, all the properties and things you need to set. But once you know that stuff, it's pretty easy to go from an ARM template to a Bicep type of
right.
approach.
Like once you know ARM templates, then you kind of have the concepts that you need for Bicep, but Bicep just makes it all so much, the syntax, it's just briefer, right? Like it's just less verbose. And easier to use and stuff like that. So that's cool. That is definitely something that's worth checking out for anybody that works with ARM, or even if you don't work with ARM yet and you need to do Azure deployments, right? We all know, well, we didn't say it, explicitly here, but infrastructure as code is the way to go, right? We don't want to manually make our changes, right? We want to build scripts, if you want to call them scripts, right? We want to build files that we can execute later. We can do source control with them. We can do code reviews to them. We can track changes in them and all those kind of things, right? And then they also sort of become reusable. You can make minor changes to them. So it's such a great, it's just a great way to work. And there's a question here from Beyond Here Lies Nothing. Why is this a language instead of a library? That's an interesting question. I guess because, Brian, unless you want to answer this, I guess it's because it works. It's a language that Azure understands, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess you could build a library around it, but you don't really need a library around it, right?
No, you don't. It's a domain-specific type of language, so it's specifically written for ARM deployments and Azure. So the syntax of it is not the syntax, but the resources, the commands, and things you can do are very Azure centric, and it definitely gives you IntelliSense, which you don't have with ARM templates. You have compile time, feedback on whether or not it's going to work or not during design time. So it's definitely in the structure that you would think as far as Azure resources are concerned.
So
it's cool. It's cool.
Without knowing much about it, it seems like, I know I haven't actually gotten to use it, and it's not because for lack of wanting to. There's so many different ways to deploy things, and I think a lot of teams are frankly not even aware of Bicep. So what I've witnessed is teams like think that, oh, I've got to use. I saw one demo where somebody used the Azure PowerShell SDK, so I guess that's what you do, and then they write PowerShell to do things like detect if the resource group exists, and if not, then deploy it, and so you start having this script that's doing all this grunt work that seems kind of unnecessary, where something like ARM or Bicep says, ARM's, I think I'm right about ARM being more of, here is the specification for what I wish we had deployed, go figure out the gaps, if any, and fix it. And then Bicep seems to go one step further by offering some minimal programming constructs, like are there loops and conditionals?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there are, which is nice. It's very elegant in how it's been implemented.
Okay. Yeah,
so
because one of
cool.
the problems I did have with ARM was that, you can get an ARM template generated when you're working with Azure, and then I look at it and say, like, boy, I hope I never have to read this again, just because it's like a bunch of stuff. It's all kinds of JSON, and one of the things JSON has in common maybe with XML is there's nothing wrong with me taking this bit of JSON object and moving it up here, but from a logical standpoint, my brain wants to see things in a certain order, and I get the sense that Bicep is reads more like a book than ARM does.
It does. Like I said, it's a domain-specific language. So it's
Yeah.
specifically for Azure and automating Azure resources. Um, the order of what you were talking about, of course, it depends. You could put something in order, and it doesn't necessarily will go in that order. So you would need to set up the dependency path if there isn't something in a later resource that isn't calling a previous resource or using something from a previous resource. So I've been burned in the past where, I have this thing written, I think it's going in the right order. Sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't work. And it was just because of the luck of the draw that something was not in dependent upon something else. So it decided on this run to run it before the other one, and it makes everything fail. So you really do need to keep in mind that there is an order to the way these things are run, and you might have to manually tell it, but for the most part, it knows based on the resource. Let's say you have like a VNet resource, and then you have a subnet resource after that, and you're in that subnet resource, you're referencing the VNet resource. Automatically, Bicep knows that there's a dependency there. But if you didn't have two resources that were like that one was using something of the previous one, it could reverse the order. And you may need it in that order. So there's a depends on statement within Bicep saying this depends on one or more resources to finish before I can run my current resource. So it's really just trial and error. If you're running these things and you're not really sure if it's going to go in the right order or not. You may not know. You may not know that, hey, this thing, if it runs before that, it's going to make it break. So you hope that you catch all that stuff in testing.
So this is this I was going to say this is like the free preview to Friday's Code Camp where Brian's going to give his talk, but that talk's free too, right? So it's all free. And
Yes.
maybe it's time to have Brian come back in a couple weeks and talk about Bicep again, because I think that it's one of those topics, like Chris, I think you hit on it pretty well, that people just don't know it's there. And they just it's one of those things that it's not like super promoted. And I think a lot of people just sort of keep doing things the old way, if you will. Well, listen, a lot of teams haven't quite gotten to infrastructure as code yet either, right? A lot of teams do manual everything. Then I think the next step is people get manual deployments, but they haven't really gotten the infrastructure set up yet. They're deploying their code into they might go into the Azure portal first and say, I need a new app service and an app service plan and build those things, and then use a build pipeline or a release pipeline to put their code into it. A lot of people haven't even gotten to that step of infrastructure as code, whether it's ARM or Bicep or anything else. Chris, you mentioned there's other ways to do it, like Azure, the CLI and things like that,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's time to revisit that topic in general about infrastructure as code. Remind people the value of that. And Brian, if you're interested, maybe we'll come back. We'll talk about Bicep again.
Yeah, I would love to. Have some great stuff to show there.
Yeah, you got it all set. You're already ready with that one, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
So how do we want to kick off tonight's topic, Chris? You this is something you've been thinking about, I think, right? Or am I putting you on the spot? But this topic for tonight.
Oh, well, I mean, one of the things that I find really interesting is, and I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts on this, is that, GitHub has been part of Microsoft for a little while now, and it's a place where you can keep your source code, and you can even run projects, like open source projects all over the world. It might be the universal home for most open source projects. But the funny thing about it is, what I've come to realize personally, this is just my personal opinion here, is that open source projects seem to have a different kind of governance and different needs than something at work. And it almost feels like, well, Azure DevOps, it works okay at work because it's probably integrating with your Azure AD, so you've already got all the permissions and organizational stuff kind of ready to go. you probably could do this with GitHub, but it just seems like, hey, we've already got all that going, and so now I can just kind of piggyback on all those permissions and the organizational hierarchy for a project. Because at work we tend to think of a project as something we all share and govern, but in open source it's something that I can clone a copy and work on it, and then I'm going to propose a change to you, but I don't get to play in the actual engine because that's being held very tightly by maintainers. So it's like there's these two paradigms for work, but yet GitHub is the place where a lot of teams want to either maintain their code or take advantage of features like GitHub Actions or even things like code spaces. So there must be a story to work effectively with both. And I just wonder how, I really don't know. This is just me spitballing right now, is what are effective ways to kind of live in this changing world here?
Yeah, so you're right. GitHub was an open source tool. It still is an open source tool. It wasn't an enterprise tool. So when Microsoft purchased it, they did a lot of work into moving it more into an enterprise type of tool with AAD integration, single sign-on. So everybody knows, who's familiar with GitHub, is that you sign in to GitHub with a GitHub account. So there are ways to, probably last year, you had to have a GitHub account that you had to sign in with, and then you also had to sign in with your work credentials too. So you would get prompted with 2 logons just to get into it. But since then, they've made a number of advances in the enterprise space with GitHub called EMU. So GitHub EMU is truly single sign-on, where you don't have to worry about the GitHub account anymore. You just have to worry about your domain credentials, your work credentials. Now, GitHub still works with a GitHub account under the surface, but what it does is it creates it automatically and hides it from you. So you don't have to interact with those GitHub credentials anymore. So that is something that's been sort of recent within the last 6 months, I believe, that this, I think it's Enterprise Managed User is what EMU stands for, has come into play. And I've actually introduced this and helped companies convert over to an EMU type of thing, because it's a different enterprise than what your normal GitHub is. So, let's say you're in GitHub and you have AAD integration and you're using the 2 accounts, your GitHub account and your work credentials. If you want to go to EMU, that's a different organization and a different enterprise that has to be created for you. That's an EMU enterprise. So then you have to migrate your repos and everything over to your new enterprise and organization. Luckily, GitHub created a nice cool tool called ECI that helps do that. And it does a really good job. It will not only bring over the source control, the source code, but the branches, the branch protection rules, the teams that you have set up. It does a lot of things, and it will map just as long as your users are in both. Mm-hmm. Your domain credentials are in both the source and the destination. It will automatically map your commits to the whereas to your work credentials. Whereas in the non-EMU organization, all your commits are shown as your GitHub account, not your work credentials, not your domain type of username.
Is that I'm just curious, is that something that there's a that's like a paid licensed subscription kind of thing? I would assume that costs money, right?
Yeah. It does, yes. Well, just generally speaking, there's a licensing cost to use GitHub at the enterprise level. We all have. We all have. We can all use it for free, but it's not the enterprise level product.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if we're going to talk about that. Maybe that's more of a specific GitHub conversation, not a hybrid conversation, but I'm not familiar with really what features come in GitHub Enterprise. I don't know if that's something that any of us here on the call are familiar with.
Well, with the there are features that you have, but then one of the main things that really is a reason to go to GitHub are the code security scanning capabilities.
Yeah, I remember about
the
that.
Code QL, Dependabot, and all of those type of things.
Yeah.
That really do a very good job at making sure that your code is following security standards.
Yeah, so Dependabot.
Just notice in the chat, Beyond Here Lies Nothing actually mentioned that GitHub Advanced Security, and I do remember hearing about that. There's also a question, Beyond Here Lies Nothing, who says if you're switching between your personal account and the EMU account, you need to log out and in. Is that correct?
Yes, you can't use in the same browser. You have to have either using Edge and Firefox or Chrome as the two separate browsers, or you have to use private. So you are correct that if you're logged into your normal GitHub, it's not the EMU, you can't just open a new tab in your browser and log into the EMU. You have to open a private browser. Different URLs, different credentials to get in. And that's it's kind of a drawback, but usually people are in one or the other. For the most part, they're not going to be in both.
I think Chris probably was the first person ever, maybe it was Rich, one of you guys were the first to ever show me in Edge that you can use those different profiles. And with that, I think that kind of solves that problem. I mean, I love that. I don't know. I think you guys showed me that, and it was around for a while. And I'm like, how did I not know about those? That's a great feature.
It does.
And it syncs too. For example, I just got a new work computer, and all of those profiles automatically synced with the browser. So I was just able to open it up on my new browser and see all the tabs that I had open on my other machine.
That's pretty slick.
Yeah, it's really
what else we got? Looks like there's a first-time chat from Alec Farrow. Surely there's quality of life improvements for team integration and larger storage, etc. I guess that's like advanced features maybe with enterprise. Is probably what the chatter's referring to, right? So yeah, I don't know. I would assume maybe that there are some benefits, other enterprise benefits. But
yeah, all you have to do is look it up in your browser and see what are the difference between what does enterprise offer.
Yeah, right. That's cool. We could do that. But anyway, so we're talking about, in this show, right, like ways to work together. I find that's an interesting topic. I think, where else I think this is an interesting topic? Like as a transition, right? Like my organization, we are full on like AZDO, Azure Devops, right? We made a big commitment to it a while ago, and we're using the boards, we're using the pipelines and everything. We use source control. It's Git through Azure DevOps. We use test cases. I think we use pretty much everything it has to offer, right? Sometime we're going to want to move over to GitHub, right? And I think of this a little bit almost as like this hybrid model is also like a play for getting there. Like, can we do this? So I'm really interested in hearing about like how they work together for that scenario as well.
Right. So you're absolutely right. A lot of organizations are deeply invested in Azure DevOps, and they have not only all their source code in there, but their pipelines, their work items, like you mentioned. So moving everything over to GitHub, really for most people would not be possible. Some of it has to do with just feature. There's not feature parity, and you need to do things in Azure DevOps that you would not be able to do in GitHub. The whole work item structure is different. Azure boards, there's no real equivalent to Azure boards. You have issues in GitHub, and issues are great, but it doesn't have the same work item types. So if you have all of these work item types that you have been creating for years in Azure DevOps, you just can't say, all right, let's move that all over to GitHub. It would be very disruptive, first of all, because there's not a one-to-one parity with it. And you would have to change your whole approach and how you do, issues and work items.
Well, does GitHub just have like the one unified issues view, which is fine for your public facing? Again, I'm the open source project. This is my public facing issues wall. But then in the Azure DevOps world, you can have multiple boards that might, and they could be for however you need it. Maybe different teams, maybe different projects, who knows? But I do think that there's limited support. It's so hard to know every feature in all of these products, right? But I feel like there's limited support for that, but it isn't as fully fleshed out just because of the heritage from well, frankly, we're going to bring up some old terms, right? The heritage from TFS, the heritage from Visual Studio Team System that still, for all people might want to say like, oh, GitHub is the current. Well, look, there's a lot of features not implemented yet.
Yeah, and you know what? They won't be implemented either. They're not going to change issues. That's critical to GitHub, and when GitHub, everybody sees GitHub.
Yeah. So
they are going to make improvements to help it be more like Azure boards, but it's never going to be a one-to-one. In some ways, it will be better, and in other ways, it'll be missing things that you might want.
But in the meantime, we can. So what kind of ways do they work together? I mean, how do we want to shift into that part of the conversation? I mean, do you have any?
Let's say.
Or we. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just talk about it. So we have the organization, right? The client, the company that is 100% in Azure DevOps, and now Microsoft's telling them that they should go to GitHub, because in all honesty, a lot of the Azure DevOps product team moved over to GitHub. So even though there's new feature development now in Azure DevOps, it's not nearly at the same velocity as it used to be. Most of the resources are now focused on GitHub. So GitHub is going to have most of the new features going forward. So there is an incentive to move there.
Let me just jump in for a second. Maybe, I don't know if there's something Rich wants to address, but I don't think Microsoft is telling anyone to move to GitHub or Rich.
Yeah, I having had the conversation with customers, it's a discussion, right? Yes, where things are heading is certainly GitHub being the owner for all of this DevOps tooling. But it's a journey, right? It's not one of those things. There are certain reasons why customers may need to stay on Azure DevOps. And, it's part of a conversation. So we can't really say black or white, you need to go here, because they may not be ready there yet.
So, a move to GitHub, even though it could be something that Microsoft would like you to do, they're certainly not pressuring you to. Azure DevOps is going to be around for a very, very long time. I think Microsoft is pretty much still on Azure DevOps for the most part. So it's not going away. And the features that are in Azure DevOps now are phenomenal. So, even though they won't be getting new features at the same pace, it is going to continue to get new features. They're not taking features away. So it's still a phenomenal product.
Yep, there are still parts, there's still, Azure DevOps still has their releases. They still have things they're working on. But yeah, a lot of the more code advances are happening on the GitHub side.
Yeah, exactly. So, an organization is looking down the road and they're saying, okay, we eventually are going to want to move to GitHub. So how do we do that? Well, actions, we have so many pipelines, we're not going to convert them all to actions. We have so many work items, we're not going to convert them over to issues. What is the best way we could take that first step? And really, the hybrid approach makes it pretty easy to take that first step, because what you can do first and foremost is just move your source code over to GitHub and use Azure DevOps for everything else, for the pipelines, for the work items, for artifacts, for test plans. And the only difference is that your source code's over in GitHub. So Azure DevOps and GitHub have great integration in that way. So if you have a pipeline that was using Azure repos, Git, of course, it's very easy to take that pipeline and point it to a GitHub repo and still keep that same pipeline. You don't have to recreate the pipelines. You just have to repoint them. And it's very easy to do.
So the easiest step one, we've talked about a lot of things that work together, and I think we're going to talk about some more. But the easiest step one is source code, because it's just like quick switches in your pipelines, quick switches in your boards, and it just integrates, and you don't even feel like you changed anything.
Right, exactly. Now, your source code is in GitHub now. So you have pull requests that you will need. You'll need to protect your branches. All of that will take you to GitHub. So you will have to go and manage your pull requests in GitHub rather than in Azure DevOps. So you'll be spending time with this approach in GitHub and in Azure DevOps, which is not a big deal. The way that I have approached this with organizations is that they may have dozens upon dozens of repos. Now, they don't have to move all of them over at the same time, of course. You can do this in a planned way where you move a couple repos over at a time when it's right for the team to make that move. So it's not something that you can rush. It's not as though Azure DevOps is going away, and Azure Repos is phenomenal. It's great. It does everything that I would need it to do. So it's really moving to GitHub is just an evolutionary step in the path of maybe eventually moving everything over to GitHub over years and taking advantage of all the cool features that GitHub is putting into the product.
Yeah. Hey, so is there a tool if I want to move a repo from like Azure repos into GitHub? Or is it just like, I'm thinking about this. I'm trying to make sure I didn't, I was listening when Chris tells me things about Git, right? And I think, if I remember correctly, like if I had the repo, even locally, if I check it in to Git as a new repo, wouldn't the history go with it? Or yeah, see, I was listening, Chris. I see you nodding your head, right? So I guess that even doing it manually is not a terrible option, but it's probably not the best option, right?
No, you would definitely not want to do it manually. There is a tool built into GitHub that you could just point it straight to your repo in Azure DevOps, and it just brings it all over.
There you go.
So I'm not sure. I'm just being totally. I just don't know. From the Git point of view, I could add my new remote, push up there, and that would have the two repos in sync. However, what I am totally pleading, that I just don't know, is that the importer might do more. It might do more than just the Git centric part of it that I'm so familiar with it. Because there are docs on this, on importing a repository with GitHub importer. So to be fair, when I think about it from the Git perspective, okay, sure, grab the repo from this source, this remote, create a new remote, push it up there, and I feel like I'm done and I'm ready for pizza. But that's not a very enterprise way of looking at it. And that's why I totally respect that the importer might have other things in mind that I'm not covering there.
So the importer itself is basically just going to move in the code with the history and everything and the branches. There are not a whole lot of bells and whistles with it. It's just a very quick way and easy way to bring in your code by pointing it to an existing repo.
So if we did that, so I have work items that are associated with commits, right? I have work items that are definitely that are associated with commits. So do those all? I mean, I guess that the commit number, that hash, that actually Chris was talking about that a couple weeks ago with us, that hash is probably not going to change, but the link isn't really going to be valid anymore unless it somehow knows that, go find that commit, but instead of looking in Azure, go look over in GitHub. Is that something? I mean, do you have any knowledge
Well,
on
I
that,
mean,
Brian?
there is a bit of a disruption to developers
Yeah.
because they'll have to reclone in order to use the new repo in their IDEs.
Well, yeah, of course.
And you can integrate Azure boards with GitHub, so you could still have that integration, and it's a good integration.
So maybe if you integrate it, it figures out that all those links that I'm talking about that have commits, just go find them over in GitHub in our organization over there. That would seem to be something that could be done.
There would be a link to the work items.
Yeah.
After that migration, I believe.
That's cool. Now there is a question here. Another first time chat question from Peter Bloomingdale. And I just thought I'd throw this over to you. I don't know if we're talking about apples and oranges here, but the question is, how about the integration of GitHub and AWS? Are there pros and cons between AWS and Azure in terms of GitHub? Now, I want to just clarify, sometimes the terminology can get a little confusing. We're talking about Azure DevOps, which isn't exactly Azure as far as a cloud platform. Azure DevOps is just a whole integrated, it's source control, CI, CD, and things like that. And I don't know, now maybe I'm wrong. Does AWS offer something like that that's similar that would integrate with GitHub? I don't know. I don't
know if that. I'm not aware. Yeah, like a source control ALM product.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm not aware of anything like that on the
I don't
AWS
think
side.
they do.
Right.
Peter Bloomingdale responds back now saying, "Sorry for the stupid question, LOL." There's no stupid questions at all, right? As a matter of fact, Peter, I like when people ask questions like that, because there could be 15, 20, 100 people watching thinking that same question, but didn't ask, right? And so now we cleared it up for people, right? And so I think it's great. So thank you. Don't think of it like that.
And I'll be honest, I think where I was taking that question was more GitHub integration with AWS, right? And using GitHub Actions to being able to push code into AWS, and Azure DevOps being able to push code into AWS. And you can do that with both, right?
Yeah.
So, going back to some of the early thoughts around Azure DevOps tooling, and GitHub, kind of came up from this as well, coming from the open source side of, any language, any product, any location, right? So you can deploy it anywhere. So that same paradigm exists on Azure DevOps as it does in GitHub's with GitHub Actions. So yeah, I mean, you can take your code and deploy it where it needs to go. Even if it needs to be going on-prem, you could do that there as well. There are ways to make that happen too. So.
Yep, exactly. And just to give the background of Azure DevOps, that goes all the way back to 2005. It used to be called an on-premises product called Team Foundation Server, and there are many, many versions of that up until something called VSTS was introduced, and that was the cloud version. So that had Visual Studio in its name, and the goal for Microsoft was to attract the open source community. So something with Visual Studio in the name could turn off the open source community. So they changed the name to Azure DevOps. I think primarily to brand it as Azure, but also calling it a DevOps product, so to speak. And there's probably a lot of people out there screaming right now, like DevOps isn't a product; it's a way of thinking. It's but it does DevOps-y things. So
it does DevOps-y things.
Yeah,
exactly. We do have another question here from Loka. I always say Loka because otherwise it's Loka Samasta Sakinu Bhavantu. But
nicely done.
Loka is a regular. And can I run GitHub Actions in Azure DevOps? In parentheses, even on-premise, which is a whole other version of Azure DevOps. And then followed up by saying, I don't think so, and I don't think that's on the roadmap.
Right. It's one or the other. Yeah. I mean, anybody else can talk if they want on this, but they're two different products.
They are. Because the integration does go mostly both ways. But yeah, your source is going to run somewhere, and you're either going to deploy it using pipelines or using actions, one or the other.
So I will admit, for me, I don't want to say the word confusion, but it can be difficult knowing how confusing it must be that there is Azure pipelines and there's GitHub Actions, and they both, I think I'm right in saying, have a similar purpose, and they both use YAML, and they both have tasks that like are built in to do a lot of common things, but then you can create your own, and there are these marketplaces of tasks. But am I right in saying that you can't like say, wow, there's an awesome GitHub Actions task. That would be really great. Let me go use it in my Azure DevOps pipeline. I think there's a wall there.
There definitely
That's
is.
where things stop. Yeah.
And I'm not, I don't know. I'm not even really saying that's bad. I'm just saying I can see how it gets a little mind bending and confusing for someone who starts to wonder, well, can I do one or the other? Or what if I have this awesome GitHub action? Can I just run it in my Azure DevOps pipeline? And it sounds like there's a border there.
Yeah, you can't do that. The thing with Actions is it just doesn't do CI/CD. It does a whole bunch of different workflow things, whereas Azure Pipelines is focused on CI/CD. So Actions is a much broader product that has a big CI/CD component to it. But if you go look at the marketplace for GitHub for Actions, there's a whole lot more there in their marketplace than in the Azure DevOps marketplace, which is.
I did not know that. Like what's an example to put you on the spot or something? But like I don't know, just Rich, you look like you're.
Well, we did a show, right? Didn't we do a show with GitHub Actions where we talked to YouTube and said, tell us the latest video and modify the GitHub
right, and there was an
file
action that did some of that stuff already, right?
Exactly. Yeah, there are a bunch of custom actions out there that did it.
Well, writing it, the great thing, and this is so the GitHub way, is I think just like a lot of other GitHub isms, that if you follow a certain convention, you can write an action and boom, it's available for consumption by people who don't even know that you wrote it. Kind of like, how GitHub pages by convention or that README file by convention and things light up. Where on the Azure DevOps side, I mean, I can take the work to write a task, and then I think I might, someone who's an Azure DevOps expert, I'm sorry if I'm making this sounding more complicated, right? Anybody who might be watching or even from the team I feel like you got to get it in the marketplace and then people have to go find it, which might be perfectly fine if that's what I need to write a little thing that'll help me accomplish from A to B. It can be done, and I'm actually, any software product, people will find a way to use it beyond what anybody imagined. But we talk about how Azure DevOps primarily, came to life as a CI/CD type pipeline, and yet I have experience with code that deploys or even does automatic configuration on-premise servers, and you'd be like, what, really? And it's like, well, you know what? It's a way to have one button click changes, or maybe based on a change to a branch, and that's a powerful tool. So, you sort of find a way.
Exactly. Whether it's meant to do with that or not. So
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a whole lot in Actions that you can do, and it's a great product. I believe it's the Azure DevOps pipeline product team that created Actions. I'm not 100% sure when Actions were created, but it's the same people. And of course, they did a phenomenal job with Azure Pipeline, so they're going to do a phenomenal job with Actions too.
Yeah.
And
It's a good
what's
product.
interesting
And I
is
think,
how easily you can cross the streams, right? You can have a GitHub action that's paying attention to a commit in an Azure DevOps repo, and you can go the other way too. So
that's pretty interesting. I didn't know. I have not searched to see if there are actions that help you talk to Azure DevOps. That would be interesting. I mean, Azure DevOps
that's
has an
interesting. I
API.
think, one of the big advantages, like, to this hybrid model, like, if we can get there, or maybe it's not even an advantage to the hybrid model, but an advantage to going, let's just say, away from Azure DevOps and to GitHub for more, like, actions and things like that. And I'm not saying we should do that, right? But the thing is, hiring. I'm thinking about, like, hiring and onboarding and training people, right? And GitHub is, like, it's ubiquitous at this point, right? It is just, it's huge, right? Think about the people that are coming in. They have side projects wherever they work. Everybody's got side projects, right? And everybody's got their repos, even if they're small, right? And they've got their actions that are learning actions. If they come in to my organization, well, they already know GitHub Actions. They might know DevOps, right? They might know that stuff, but is it smart for me to sort of go where the people are, so to speak, right? We still lock it down with the enterprise security and all that kind of stuff, right? But I'm just thinking that I think we're going to get to a point where people are just going to know GitHub Actions because it is just so widely used. What do you guys think about that?
So GitHub has a huge base of users. I believe far more than Azure DevOps. So you definitely have a much bigger pool of developers that are using GitHub. And like you were saying, at a hiring perspective, you might be able to hire more easily if you're saying you're using GitHub rather than Azure DevOps or TFS or anything, any product out there, because it is a huge, widely known product.
Right. And think about this, Brian. I'm sorry I cut you off, but now I'm also thinking. So I work we're a Microsoft shop, right? We do C#, .NET. You guys know what I'm talking about. We're a Microsoft shop. However, a lot of places aren't just a single, platform kind of shop like that. So I can imagine a place where there's, big .NET team, big Java team, maybe you got a Ruby team, you got all these different teams, right? And in those cases, those people are less likely, to be fair, right? I think they're less likely to know the Microsoft products like Azure DevOps, right? So if you want you want to have that one platform for doing all your stuff that really can bring people together. And hey, Rich is nodding his head because it's still Microsoft, right? Nobody's upset about that.
It's not a competitor.
But it's GitHub, right? And it's.
I just think embracing the open source community and embracing, build whatever it is you want to build, how you want to build it. I love C#. I've been doing C# since it started, right? But there's reasons where C# is not always the right language to use. There's a great Node population out there. There's a great PHP population out there. We still have Ruby people who are part of the chat room here occasionally, who chime in with some of the Ruby things that they're working on. I think building whatever it is you're building, the language that you're using is the important part.
Yeah.
And to be fair, you can do all those different languages in Azure DevOps and build and deploy them too.
Exactly.
But my argument, whatever. I mean, my point is that I think as an organization, like I think of myself, like again, I'm a leader of a large software, set of software teams, right? And I'm thinking about hiring. And there is really something to be said for if we're using the platform that is the one people know, right? That's an advantage to us, right? And it's good. It's not like it's a shoddy version of the thing. Like, oh, I'm going to go use this junky open source thing because it's where everybody did. No, it's GitHub, right? And if we were there, and then we had this project, and we thought, you know what, this project would really be great for a bunch of Python developers, or like Rich said, maybe there's this project that's really good. We're going to hire this crack team of, well, maybe they're Angular, but they didn't work in a .NET shop. They're just Angular, right? Or whatever the thing is. But the likelihood is that they can come into our team and they know GitHub already.
Right.
They're ready to go. They're ready to start. And I think that's a big advantage if look forward thinking about your hiring possibilities of your staff and retention and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's interesting.
Just a question on that. I mean, if you're looking at just the developer team, is it taking it even up a step from that and saying they know Git?
I mean, if you know Git, you can use it anywhere. It's Git.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the idea, right?
I will say that Git. I found that so there's more to a lot of enterprise teams than just the developers. And I found that your folks who are more of like I hate to use this really generic term, but more of the project management, they really want to see, they're happy to see the board that you might see in an Azure boards with columns that you could define, where you see items moving across. And that's just first class in Azure boards, where I don't want to pick on GitHub. I just think it's a different model of the wall of issues that are picked off one at a time by the community versus the board that's assigned to this team and the board that's assigned to that team and the burn down charts and all that, which I know you can do with GitHub. I am not saying you can't do it. You can. It's just kind of like this first classness to it here that's very work. And then this is the very community where someone's going to come along and help us out because they're going to grab that issue and they're going to submit a PR, and that's great.
Yeah.
And it's just so funny to see, like, I think everything you said is true, Andy, about how there's a competitive advantage to saying, look, you love GitHub, we love GitHub. You don't have to come here and learn anything about this. I mean, even the first thing about a pull request and a work item in this other thing you've never used before. Like, I totally get that. And yet at the same time, here's Azure DevOps talking about how build your app, whether it's Go or Python or Ruby, like this is all on their front page here, where they're saying we'll build anything. So it's almost kind of like the tool is there, you pick what works best for you. And in some cases, if you've already made the choice to get your developers something like a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, well, you've already paid for us anyway.
Well, that's true. That is a good reason.
Do you really need to go pay for GitHub Enterprise? You've already paid for us. If that's something your shop has done, some shops might not have.
So to be fair, though, I know that Microsoft's working on bringing those Visual Studio subscriptions into the GitHub world.
Yeah.
So I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that is at this point, but it is coming.
You kind of wonder. I hear you. You kind of wonder. But I even kind of ran across this article. We were talking about it just kind of a little bit. Trigger and Azure pipelines run from GitHub Actions. So I feel like even in the documentation, this whole section on ecosystems and integration is about, hold on, you can run in both worlds. It's okay. We've got you. It's not a hack.
Yeah, and I would if that's something if you've got a license for one and you're interested in using the other product, talk to your account team. They can help bridge the gap between all of that. It's there's a story there.
That's
story that we just don't understand because it's so complicated.
Because it's licensing. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
but it's good to know there's a story there. And you know, I think we're all. I'm not saying this. I'm not putting Rich on the spot in any way, right? But like, I think this story is still growing. Like everything shows so far that there's a lot of interaction between the two, and I really wonder what we're going to see 5 years from now, how this whole thing is going to look. It could be different, but so what other like are good ways to integrate and like work in this hybrid model?
So really, the source control integration and the pipelines and the boards are the main things. I mean, that's really the major things that are in Azure DevOps. And you have artifacts in GitHub, but there's no reason not to use artifacts in Azure DevOps if that's where all your packages are deployed to and published to. So there are integrations that allow you to, of course, maintain use of your Azure artifacts, even though your source code is over in GitHub, and maybe even your issues at this point are over in GitHub, but your pipelines are still in Azure DevOps. So it's pretty seamless to make the move when you take it into that incremental type of approach of doing the easiest thing first, moving your code, setting up your branch policy rules, integrating advanced security. So the advanced security thing is a big selling point for a lot of organizations to move over to GitHub for their source control. Because if you have to pick a security product that will do your code scanning, there are a number of them that are out there, but some of them are pretty darn expensive. And companies may not want to, if they do the cost-benefit analysis, they might not want to purchase those products because they are such a cost. Where advanced security is relatively cheap compared to those other products. And advanced security is pretty robust. I mean, it's we were talking about it being GitHub being open source. Well, a lot of open source stuff is using dependencies that people develop, and things such as Dependabot alerts will find vulnerabilities in the packages that you're using, the NuGet packages or the npm packages or the Python packages, and it will flag those for you and tell you not only that there's an issue with it, but tell you what you need to upgrade to, which version of that package you should upgrade to in order to mitigate that vulnerability. And it even has the ability to create pull requests for you, that if it finds a vulnerability, it will create a new branch and allow you to make the change there, and then have a pull request to merge it back to your main branches.
Wow. So we've gone from, there was a time when there were there's always been vulnerabilities and dependencies, right? Of course there have been, right? But, we would say, well, but I didn't know about the vulnerability, right? Okay. So I didn't fix it because I didn't know about it. And then they started alerting us about the vulnerability. And then people said, but I don't have time. I can't fix that. I got to make a pull request. I got to go change it. Now they're saying, well, we're going to tell you about it. We're going to give you the pull request. Like
we're going to make the change for you.
Right. Exactly. Pretty soon they'll be doing that. And you know what else I was thinking as you were talking about some of this cool stuff, I was thinking plus GitHub Copilot, right? Which we've talked about on the show here. If I move my code over to GitHub, I get GitHub Copilot. And that's pretty cool, right?
Well, Copilot runs locally, right? So it doesn't matter where that repo lives.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, we've had fun with Copilot, and it doesn't have. I've had some amazing things happen with Copilot on just a Markdown document I'm writing that isn't committed anywhere. Where I was just writing documentation, and I think I know this is totally an aside, and I think I was about to write, for example, one way to deploy a resource group is, and then it suggested the exact CLI command that I was about to type, even looking up at the rest of my document to see what my sample resource group name was that I was using. And I was going, okay, tab, let's keep going. And I was just like, it really was a little strange.
Right. So you can use, I didn't even think about this.
Yeah.
So as long as you have a GitHub Copilot license, it doesn't matter where the code is. That's nuts.
Code that you're working on, yeah.
Right. There's so much to remember. This is why I got to watch the reruns more often. I told you guys I got to do that.
Yeah, so those advanced security features, they're free for public repositories.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
They're not for private.
Right. But
No.
that's still
that's kind of cool.
Astounding. Like get your personal projects, there if that's okay, because that way when there's some vulnerability and you're not paying attention, you have no idea, and it automatically sends you the pull request to update to the Docker container image that fixes it, and you're going, wow, thanks GitHub.
Yeah.
By GitHub providing that for free to open source projects, think about how that strengthens the open source model, right? I can use an open source project because I say, well, they're on GitHub. So GitHub's making it easy for them to be secure. Like the likelihood of it having a vulnerability has gone down now. So it's like, even though my project's not open source, I'm pulling in that open source. I'm pulling in a dependency that is open source, right? And it's been verified, or whatever they call it. It's scanned, and so so it's kind of interesting because sure, enterprises need to pay for it, but we're all getting the benefit of the fact that those other open source projects are scanned for free. That's cool.
Yeah. I could show you some of this advanced security stuff and how you can use it with Azure pipelines if you want. I can share my screen.
Yeah, hold on. Let me
Chris, can you
let me make sure that's all working.
Chris, when you're ready.
Okay.
Plus, hopefully we can share your screen, right? Where's
so yeah, when you share your, go ahead and share, and then let me. It should.
Hopefully, I'm sharing the right one. Looks like
you have to share it to Skype, and hopefully that won't crash Skype. But yeah, I see
go.
your bicep repo here.
Hold on, here we go. We're gonna give it a shot. Ooh, that's on the stream. I know it's a little behind for people watching live, like the four of us.
All right, I tried to hit my drum roll, but I was a little late.
Now, it on stream, if you increase the view a little bit, like Control Plus a couple times, it definitely helps. But other than that, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. So here I have a repo in GitHub, and as you can see, it's all here. I have your branches, 17 branches. Another thing that I don't think we talked about is this whole language card over here on the right. It tells, and I think this is really cool, it tells you the percentage of code by code type in your repo. You can see that?
Yeah, I see your rockin' pug right there. Whatever pug
yeah,
is.
What's pug?
4%.
I have no idea what pug is.
Pug.
That used to be Jade back in the day. It's a templating language for usually used in Express. So in a way, you might think of it like Razor.
Oh, all right. Okay. That's cool. 0.2. Okay. Groovy too. 0.2.
Yeah. So here we have pull requests. We have security, and the security gives you the code scanning is a public project, so repo. So I get to use the advanced security tools, but it will tell you where there are problems, and it will actually even tell you how to mitigate those problems. You can see a lot of these things are using jQuery, some of the stuff that you wouldn't really want to scan, and you can filter this stuff out. So that's not an issue, but this is showing you the different issues that you have and with a lot of recommendations and things on how to get rid of it. So
wait, when you say issues, like it's actually creating an issue for you?
It's not creating an issue. I'm talking about issues in your code. Problems in your code.
I was wondering if it goes to the step and actually creates like an issue for you or something like that.
I believe you can set it to do that, but that's not on by default if you can.
No, that's okay. Just wondering.
Yeah, so we have the ability to mark this as a false positive, used in test, won't fix, in order to get rid of these things as you work on them. But this stuff gets set up. So we have within the repo here. And where you set that up is in settings and in code security and analysis. And here you can tell it what you want to use. Dependency graph, Dependabot alerts, Dependabot security updates, where if you enable this, it will create that branch for you and a pull request, and will actually update your code for you with the recommended solution to it, which is why they put it in their own branch, a different branch, so you're not touching your code. And then you create the pull request if it's okay, and you fix it. And then you have this code scanning, and you have secret scanning. So another thing this does is it scans your code, see if you have any secrets in there that shouldn't be in there, which is pretty awesome. And you can also tell it
looking for like product keys or passwords,
find secrets,
like
passwords, connection strings that maybe have passwords in it. So you can also tell it when to fail a pull request. So I have it marked as any right here, but normally you would do high or higher. And then, oh great, that's good. Let's see here. Excuse me, I have to get back into this.
It's cool. It's not sharing that. I don't know if you did that, but it was like a blocked over here.
Oh, was it? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that's kind of neat. And macros saying line scan 5.22K. Must be a rebuild. I'm trying to.
Oh, I think he's saying that in his repo, it says that it scanned 5.2 thousand lines out of 5.15 thousand, and making the joke that it's a readability issue.
Yeah, still cookies.
Oh, I see. That's funny though.
So one of the cool things you could do here is use Actions and Azure Pipelines at the same time, or things like CodeQL. In Azure Pipelines, you can integrate CodeQL calls within your YAML, for example, but it's not integrated very well. So these commands will go using the CodeQL CLI, will go download it, install it, create the database, run the analysis, and then upload the results. However, sometimes that download of CodeQL could take up to 30 minutes, depending on what's going on. Sometimes it happens in 5 seconds. So there isn't really any great consistency there. And of course, waiting for something to download for 30 minutes is not very good for a PR build. That's not going to be what people want to do. So with Actions, though, it's more integrated. So you can see here, you can have CodeQL actions, and the actual action is in here. And this is the YAML for doing this. And what you can do is set up your branch protections. So I have Philly.net as that branch as my default branch, so that we're going to consider that the trunk that we branch our feature branches off of. So you can set up branch protection rules here, saying, require a pull request. You can have approvers, and all these different things that you can set up. But another thing is you can tell it to do status checks before merging. So this will allow you to, and we have here, analyze C# as a GitHub action. So what this will do is when you create a pull request, it's automatically going to run this check, this GitHub action. So to take that into consideration with Azure pipelines, you no longer have to worry about integrating that CodeQL code within your Azure pipelines code. And a number of organizations that I've worked with, we went down that path of trying to integrate Azure pipelines code to do the CodeQL stuff, and then realized that it's not something that is, very usable or consistent. So we figured out how to create the use actions along with Azure pipelines. So if we go over to Azure pipelines, you can see here we have a pipeline and it's going to GitHub. And we have our Dev Talk Show branch here. So you can see here, this is a GitHub repo, but we are in Azure DevOps, pointing to the code there. So if I go and make a change here and save it, normally you wouldn't do it here with your code, you would do it in your IDE. But then you come back here, and you can see here, we now have a pull request that we can create. And this pull request is going from Dev Talk Show feature branch over to our trunk. So I can create this pull request. And what it will do is run among a number of things. I don't have it set up to not run everything. So this is going to run a lot of stuff. But you can see that this is required, this one, because this is what I set up in the status check, is this C# one. And this will run, even though this is in actions, it's going to run as part of your pull request. So you don't have to now have that CodeQL code within your Azure pipelines in order to work. This is part of a hybrid approach. It happens a lot faster doing it this way. So
okay. So do me a favor. So could you give me that scenario one more time? So we've got code that's in, I just want to make sure I got this right. Because this is a little bit of a back and forth between the two systems, right? The code lives in a GitHub repo.
Right here.
The pipeline is an Azure pipeline.
Exactly. Right here.
The pipeline, because the code lives in Git and there are some rules on what gets triggered by the commit, then you're getting the benefit of GitHub Actions running as the pipeline in Azure DevOps doesn't know that the stuff's running over in GitHub, though, right?
No, it does not.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure, but it's cool because you're kind of getting both of those things happening for you.
Yeah, exactly. And it will fail a pull request if it finds something. One of the key things to understand, though, if it found something before and you run this again, it's not going to fail the pull request because it says it's not a new issue or it's not a new vulnerability. It's not a new security problem. So these things are going to pass, even though if we went and looked at the security stuff up here, there's still 25 code scanning alerts and 20 Dependabot alerts, but it will still pass the pull request. But if it's something that's new that's introduced, then it will fail the pull request. So you can see here, we're not going to sit here and watch this whole thing run, but these checks are running, and I could easily make sure that, this is my pipeline in Azure DevOps. I didn't put a PR call, or I didn't put a PR section within here. tell it not to run on PRs. So you could do something like PR here as a trigger, like a PR trigger that only works with GitHub, and tell it none, so it won't run. But I didn't do that, so it's also running this pipeline as part of the check. But this is the only one that's required. So if we go look at this, we can see that it's running all that stuff. Initializing CodeQL, it's doing an auto build, and it's performing the analysis. And then it will upload anything new to the repo that you'll be able to find here.
That's pretty integrated. Like, a hybrid.
Yeah.
That's cool.
But as you can tell, you have to come over here for your pull requests.
Yeah.
Whereas normally your pull requests would be over in this area for Azure.
So what do you get? You just get nothing. Like I guess you almost want that like window to go away, but
which one? This repos
like
one?
the pull requests. Yeah, like not the
well,
so what do you have there?
I think
repo?
like
well,
what you're saying, Andy, is people
here.
wouldn't even go there. Like if it wasn't there, then people wouldn't get confused and go look there. Is that what?
You could shut it off. So if you're done with Azure repos,
you can.
Here we go.
Shut it off right here.
Nobody did not realize you could do that.
Look at that.
I guess
there's
I just
the
never.
Tip. Somebody write that
so
time down.
So that yes, you could kind of get rid of that, and then it really sort of avoids the confusion. But I'll bet a lot of companies use both, right? Where they still have some of their repos in Azure DevOps. You're migrating, like you said, it's probably not a. Why is that? You said you might just move slowly. You don't have to move everything at once.
Right, because you don't want to be disruptive to your teams. Everybody has to keep their velocity up, and you don't want to do something that's going to have a huge impact. So you don't want to do a big bang type of thing. You want to do things over time.
I want to take a second, answer a question here. Off the Rails Gaming is just asking about our show in general. First time watcher, is this channel always centered around Azure, or is that just the topic tonight? Chris, Rich, one of you guys want to answer that?
I think we do a lot of topics. Sometimes they're not centered around a specific technology at all, right? Like when we've talked about maybe career or work or Git. But there's no question that when you look at the backgrounds of the three of us, that you've got two Microsoft MVPs. Rich is an employee of Microsoft. We've got Brian here tonight, who's a guest, also a Microsoft MVP. I mean, absolutely. I think you're going to see that, hey, these are some of the things we know and talk about. However, that has been top of mind, and I think because of a lot of the openness, we're talking about GitHub supporting any language, any platform, that there are certainly some topics in the work that aren't necessarily, .NET. We've been talking about it a long time as wanting to use some other languages on the show and just find experts on those to talk to us about them. Sometimes in the audience, right? We keep trying to get some of our good friends to come on and say, hey, Ruby, come on and teach us some Ruby. So
yeah, we've done a wide variety. I mean, I think and specifically this question was about Azure, right? Some of our talks are not cloud-based at all, but we do lean Microsoft, right? We're certainly going to be talking about Microsoft, .NET, C# more than other things, Azure. You're probably not likely to see a demo with AWS on this show, right? But we kind of like to talk about it. We do like to hear different perspectives about people. I don't think we're like anti other stuff, but I think what Chris is saying, we certainly sort of lean down the Microsoft path. Maybe lean is too soft a word, but it's definitely not just an Azure show. I think I would just add that as well, and I hope that's hope that Off the Rail Gaming, I hope that makes you happy, and I hope you'll come back again and visit us other times, because you said first time watcher, and
Yeah,
we
thanks for watching.
like having everybody here and hearing different perspectives, right?
You talk about other things like Angular too, right?
We do, yeah. We'll talk about we'll kind of talk about it, a lot of different things. A lot, like Chris said, some of it's not even technology. We have some really great shows where we talk about hiring, we've talked about resumes, we've talked about interview processes, we've talked about agile, we've talked about solid principles, which are really not language specific, and other design types of shows. So I think we cover a pretty broad base, but I think you're likely to see the demos on those topics be like, C sharp. And I don't know. I guess we shouldn't be apologizing. I'm not apologizing for that. That's where we're at, right? So, but I think we're pretty open. It's just that, yeah. Rich, I see you posted, right? The Dev Talk Show, our concept was supposed to be developers doing what developers do, just recorded live during a stream. So sometimes we're writing code, sometimes we're debating things, sometimes we're just having conversations about things that are important to developers. That's kind of where we're trying to be. And if you are watching, I'll use this little break here as a little commercial too. If you are watching, feel free to subscribe, follow us. I don't know if we're done yet for the night, but I'll just say, subscribe or follow on the platform you're on. Throw us a like, leave us a comment. If you're watching in the future on YouTube, we'd love to hear what you guys think. And yeah, right there, right? King Louie, the King Louie says, "Can we watch this again?" Certainly.
Great question.
We have we have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/the Dev Talk Show. We could post that up in there. Yeah, we've got a pretty big archive of a whole bunch of talks. Admittedly, we're like a chatty thing, right? So like, it's it can be a long show, hour and a half, 2 hour shows sometimes and things like that. But Off the Rails Gaming says, DevOps guy. I'm a DevOps. Brian's a DevOps guy, right? We love this stuff. Mostly ops and less dev. Yeah. I'm glad you're interested in learning about Azure. We talk about Azure a lot, I think, but it's not only, what we do. So, anything else we should be plugging while we're taking a little break here?
Yeah, well, I went ahead and put just change the screen over to the YouTube channel where you can see there's Brian and us right now, live right now. So if you're watching in the future, you'll see, go to youtube.com/the Dev Talk Show. And you've got all the old shows. We're on weekly, 8:30 p.m. U.S. Eastern time. So if you're not in the U.S. Eastern time zone, or we are about to change our time again. Like I think we're UTC -5 right now, and we're about to be UTC -4 because of daylight savings coming next weekend. I think
that's next weekend.
March 13th.
I think it's March.
We're gonna lose an hour of sleep.
Yeah, so here it comes. But if you're looking to join us live, we love to have people joining us live because it means we can answer questions just like this or just hear your comments. We learn so much from chat. Sometimes there's plenty of times where we're fumbling around. I remember the first time we ever did Azure DevOps, Rich, in the Malvern office, when we were trying to deploy and we couldn't get it to work, and people in chat were saying, remember, you switch to Linux. It's the different slash. It's not backslash for directories. And we finally looked at chat. They solved the problem for us. Boom, the pipeline worked. That was a couple years ago now, but we love that. We absolutely love that. We're here to be a developer chat. It's not just us. Trust me, we don't know everything. We love learning from you as well. So youtube.com/the Dev Talk Show. We definitely have a home site at thedevtalkshow.com, or catch us here on Twitch or YouTube every week. And heck, we even simulcasted our Twitter account now.
We do?
Yeah, it's on Twitter right now. Like, how
cool is that?
Check this out. Let's see.
So Loca's saying
Whoops. Oh, I
2 a.m. becomes 3 a.m. So yeah, so 3 a.m. It might be time to go to sleep.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're up at
That's
2 a.m., remember it's really 3.
It's a big fan. Loca's a big fan. Loca's here a lot of weeks. I don't know if Loca works nights or what, um, or but thanks, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, it's great. It's we do have some folks that join us a lot, and let me tell you, we're grateful that you do, and I know it definitely keeps us coming back. It's awesome.
So Brian, what else we got?
That's pretty much it. The CoQL, going back to advanced security, it supports a lot of different languages, but you know what it doesn't support? VB.net. So if you have repos that are VB.net, you can't take advantage of CoQL.
Oh man, we haven't done any shows on VB.net. I don't think we've talked about that on this.
Oh.
So
funny thing is, I was in a call with one of the CoQL product team people, and what I was calling about is the client had a number of VB.net. He was like, "What's that? VB.net?" It's like he didn't even know what it was. He's like, "We're not going to support that, though."
That's depressing, sort of, So yeah, so there's a lot of good things. I mean, I'm curious to hear, like, if any viewers are doing. I'm interested in this hybrid approach, as I was saying earlier, because I do see it as a sort of a gateway towards moving over in the future. When I'm looking forward to the time when GitHub has like full backlog grooming and boards the way we would need them to be, we meaning my organization, right? And I think it's heading there. Listen, to be fair, I saw a comment earlier that people mentioned that there are other products out there. I mean, we know there's Azure Devops is pretty good. There's also, let's be honest, right? There's Jira, there's Confluence. There are other tools out there. So I guess if you're using, but I don't know why I would. We actually looked at switching to Jira at one point from Azure boards. We weren't going to switch everything else. We were still, committed to. This was before GitHub was even, what it is now. I wasn't impressed. I know a lot of people really like Jira, and so we're not here to bash other products or anything like that, but I didn't see it. It didn't seem to have the structure that I needed or something, but I could have been getting my tutorials from the wrong person or something. I don't know, but there are other options out there, right? But I don't know if I would like maybe the answer is to just keep the repo, go to Git repos, GitHub repos, go to GitHub Actions, which are really becoming something, and keep the boards and stuff in Azure boards, right? So can we talk about for a minute the GitHub Actions versus Azure pipelines, right? So in Azure DevOps, I should say, right? There's also like two flavors there. There's pipelines and there's releases, I think, right? And I guess I thought releases was kind of moved to the back seat. And maybe it has, but we still use the different things for different things. We still use the pipelines for builds and the releases. Am I using that terminology right? Is that what they're called, Brian?
Yep.
Releases?
Yeah. Pipelines are called the YAML stuff, and releases are the classic designer.
No. We use it all in YAML, but we still use there's two nodes on the menu.
Yeah.
Right?
Pipeline and releases.
Pipelines and releases, right? And we don't use the classic designer for anything. But I thought we were supposed to move towards a model where the pipelines support that whole multi-stage pipelines, and so you could have a build and a release sort of as different stages. We haven't gone there yet, but I guess the bigger question I'm asking is like, what things does that do better than actions, right? Or does actions really cover all the scenarios you'd want to have from your builds and your pipelines in Azure DevOps?
So it's an evolutionary thing with actions. Like actions didn't have the concept of environments, for example. Variables weren't really treated in a way that it is in Azure pipelines. But all of those gaps, I think, have been filled for the most part. I don't work with actions that much to confirm what the limitations are, or what you might want to do in Azure pipelines that you can't do in actions. But as far as my reading is concerned, you could do pretty much everything in actions now that you can do in Azure pipelines, as far as the main things. So I don't think it's a question of, at this point, if you wanted to go to actions, you should. I think that if you wanted to create new pipelines and actions and maybe keep your old pipelines in Azure pipelines, that's an approach too that you could take.
I found an article on Microsoft Docs that compares, it's dated 2/18/22. Wow, okay. That's pretty recent.
And share your
And
desktop.
it does go through, what's that?
You share your desktop.
Yeah, do you want me to share?
Is it this one?
that'd
Is
be
it
fun.
compare and contrast GitHub Actions and Azure Pipelines?
Yeah, you got the right one. Yeah, you wanted to share yours? You're probably
Yeah,
set
it's
up to
already-
do that. And it seems to have a lot of stuff. There's a table a little further down, but the table says it's not a table, but there's a list here. It does say it's dated November. And like deployment groups, deployment jobs, gates, automatic collection and evaluation of signals to control continuation. So GitHub Actions at the time, at least, didn't support gates. Service connections, that's interesting. So there are definitely some differences, but the list of differences doesn't appear to be huge. They don't have variable groups, which are like ways to store, like GitHub Actions doesn't have variable groups, which is a cool way to have like reusable variables and things like that, but it's probably not a showstopper, It's interesting because there was one thing I was thinking of. I didn't know if it had, and I lost my train. I saw something in here. Oh, self-hosted agents. So does GitHub support like self-hosted agents?
In
You mean
Hosted
with
runners,
use case, right?
they're called
Hosted runners, yeah.
hosted runners. So they do have that. Yeah. That's cool. So there really is a lot of parity.
There is.
So the
It's
idea,
really a question of where your investment is and whether you have the bandwidth in order to convert over, or if you're willing to have a hybrid approach where all new stuff are actions and you just keep the old stuff as pipelines.
Yeah, I would think that that's something we would do. I mean, we still have stuff in Octopus too, right? Like we had Octopus deploy. Then at a certain point, all the new stuff started going into Azure pipelines. So, and we actually use, our approach is we use, this was before, think about hosted agents and stuff like that. This is before we had that. So we do Octopus deploy for our internal data center deployments, and everything that we deploy to Azure, we use Azure pipelines for. And we generally don't build anything new for our data center. Pretty much everything goes to Azure. We host most things in the cloud now. So we have that combination already. Then we could add another layer and do GitHub Actions for new stuff if we wanted to. But I don't know. That's a bigger decision, and I'm not going to happen anytime soon. I got too many other big fish to fry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so in that article, there's something that says, I need to define multiple stages. and it says Azure
Yep.
Pipelines. So apparently,
Yeah.
Actions doesn't support stages. Not 100%
Yeah,
sure.
Chris, if you go to the bottom of the article, there's a section called recommendation table for common scenarios. Yeah, okay, yeah, you got it. And yeah, that's actually a pretty clear explanation, Brian, of certain situations.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just trying to read it a little bit myself too. Sometimes they say GitHub Actions. I need to model workflows for scenarios other than CI/CD. That's what you were talking about, right? For example, custom alerts on pull requests, GitHub Actions. I need a simple workflow for building and deploying open source repos to a small set of environments. GitHub Actions will get you there, right? But gates to control pipeline progress, multiple stages, environment. I need to use the same environments across multiple projects and repos, Azure pipelines. I have repos that aren't in GitHub. That's a good point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Azure pipelines, flexible.
But how about this? I need to model workflows for scenarios other than CI/CD.
Yeah.
That's GitHub
Yeah.
Actions.
Yeah. And you kind of were mentioning that. Like, it's not just about CI/CD.
Right.
I think that's
it's
a cool approach
interesting.
they took. It's a generic thing. What's that, Chris?
I find it interesting that they have both, and I need to create custom tasks that are open source. Both support that. At the same time, I need to create custom tasks that aren't open source. I kind of love how I think it's interesting that they're not next to each other, but it
Yeah, that's weird.
definitely highlights that you've got both platforms thinking about both scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Missed a couple questions from chat. Off the Rail Gaming says, as most Microsoft guys are running your stuff on Windows Server or Linux. I don't know if we have different answers to that. Do you guys want to answer that?
Yeah. Yeah. And so this is an evolution, I can tell you, for the last several years is it's probably fair to say newer projects, newer code going to Linux. There might be something legacy that still requires Windows. Heck, doesn't even have to be legacy. It can be current. Because look, code is an investment, and I can think of past projects that were built on Windows, perhaps even a very early .NET, like a 2.0, and it's been upgraded along with it, and you just aren't going to throw that investment away. We're talking years and years and years and years of investment. However, we were just having this conversation very recently about how exciting it is to be spending, for me, I find it exciting to be spending more time in Linux and learning to put more time into some of the tools that have been common for the Linux folks for years and years and years. I actually think it's been a lot of fun these last few years, really kind of getting ready for the cloud native world and smaller, tighter, leaner OS.
Yeah, I think sort of same boat for me, right? I think it used to be, when I was building, setting things up in Azure, everything was like a Windows server, and I don't mean an actual Windows server, but I mean, if I was creating an app service plan, which is basically a virtual server, that's hosting my serverless things. Now it's generally, I think it might even default to Linux, the choice. I don't recall, but I think we push if we're building .NET 5, .NET 6 kind of stuff, it's Linux. But Tiwahoo says Windows or Linux, both, right? Whichever you want, we could do it. We could do it all. Although there's a follow-up, how do you manage audit of your Linux servers, tracking who did what and when? Well, in my case, we're not actually using servers. I don't know. How do I explain that, right? Like, I don't create the server. I let Azure owns the server, right? It's my apps are running on Linux. My serverless apps, right, are running on Linux, but it's not really a Linux server that I have access to.
I think my answer there is that I'm not evolved enough with it. there's another part of the whole IT organization that has I haven't gotten involved enough in that. But look, I could say that for the Windows side too. I've practically spent a whole career saying like, well, I haven't had to think about that. I don't know if that's good or bad, by the way.
Maybe we can help the King Louie out. King Louie asks us a question here. I don't know if you guys saw this.
Yeah.
I have been system admin for 8 years. I learned AWS and DevOps, and I'm still learning. I am trying to get DevOps job in the right way, but consultants want me to write more of DevOps experience. Please let me know how to go about. Want me to write more of DevOps experience? I think.
You mean on your resumes or something?
Yeah, I think
DevOps
that means that they want to see more experience first, right? That's
right.
That's always a tough one. If you don't have experience to get the job. I guess I would say, are there opportunities at your current employer to be dabbling, system admin certainly is a person that has like that's the ops side of the DevOps, right? A lot of times. So to try to get that experience, to try to build up that resume. The other way I would say, and then I'll throw it out to you guys, but there's always work on side projects. You can do this stuff the right way as an individual, at home, right? Like these platforms are there. It's not like you need, when King Louie learned to be a system admin, you needed to have servers to learn all that stuff. You needed all this stuff. It was probably an expensive thing, to learn these different things. Now, just spin it up in the cloud and learn it, right? And build examples and sort of build your resume on your own stuff. That might be a way to help. I don't know if you guys have any other ideas.
So, go ahead.
I think you're right. Do what you can through work, but then side projects and gather that experience out there, because the tools are there to help improve your skill set there for sure.
Yeah. Brian, what were you going to say?
Well, I mean, one of the main things with DevOps, when you talk about the CI/CD aspect of it, DevOps is much bigger than that. It's cultural. It's enterprise-wide team structure, all the things that nobody wants to address because it's so hard. So CI/CD is relatively easy, but in order to do that, you'd have to understand the code too, and the developer side, because if you're running into a problem building or deploying something, you might have to dig into the code and see what's going on there. So it's good to have both the dev and the infrastructure side of things when it comes to like a DevOps role. But when you're talking about CI/CD, a lot of people think more infrastructure. What are you deploying to? So having the ops side is also very critical.
Yeah, you mentioned the hard, what you called the hard part, I think, and I relate. The cultural stuff, getting the organizational changes on board to be a real DevOps organization is hard, right? Another tip for King Louie that I thought of, something that I think we can all relate to, and I don't know if it's possible for King Louie, the King Louie. I don't know where the king lives, where they were reigning, I should say. But if you can get out there and do those presentations at a user group or open conferences and things like that, and show your knowledge to people, right? Be out there and present those things, whether you're blogging about it, or whether you're talking about it, or you go on a show and you talk about it like this, or something like that. and you can build up some some sort of credit with companies where they're like, okay, well, they might be working as a system admin, but I've seen that person talk. They know what they're talking about. They know the stuff, right? And that's a way to sort of prove your worth if your resume maybe doesn't say that for you. You guys agree with that?
All experience.
At least with kind of the virtual portfolio that we have today with something like a GitHub. A lot of people use it as a virtual portfolio. I know that's not, I mean, I guess part of me says is it's not really, but that's not true. A public repo where the actions are visible, other people can see what you've done. I could see that working. Another thing is I know this kind of splits into the developer idea, but let me talk about this. We were talking earlier, so this is a little bit of a transition. Is we were talking earlier about how you create a pipeline in Azure Pipelines, and that's a YAML process, and then you create it in GitHub Actions, and you can't really cross the streams. But it turns out there's a project out there. Here's a website, pipelines-to-actions.azurewebsites.net. And the project does exactly that. It takes an Azure DevOps pipeline and converts it based on the tasks over to YAML. And so now what this person is showing me is, besides having some development chops, is that, look, they've taken the time to understand both of these platforms and think about a specific problem. I mean, I would be willing to bet this person could tell us a lot about both Azure DevOps pipelines and GitHub Actions, because otherwise, how could they have built this? And it's an open source project on GitHub, this Azure Pipelines to GitHub Actions converter. And so anybody could come take a look at what was done here and take a look at these specific actions and workflows and say like, oh, wow, yeah, this person really seems to know. So this is kind of your point, Andy, is this person seems to know what they're doing because they can tell us all about these platforms, right? So I don't know.
Yeah. Sort of make your opportunities happen. It's easier said, listen, it's easy for some people to say that. I mean, it depends on where you live. And, can you paste the URL when you refer? They're asking for, yeah.
Yeah, this is just a really neat example. So,
yeah. It's hard. It's hard to change. We've talked about this kind of stuff, right? It's hard to change fields or change your area of expertise and move into those things. Sometimes you got to be ready to just jump when that opportunity comes. But it is not easy. I think we all understand that. We can all talk about, situations that, we had, and, it sounds like, oh, it's so easy, but it is not. And we can all relate to that, I am sure. Yeah.
So I think we can talk about next week, right? And then we're just about there.
Let's talk about next week.
Yeah. So
next week's not a next week's not a Microsoft based talk.
No.
Right?
Next week we're going to get back into content tracking, version control. Last time we thought we were going to talk about this last time, and then we got really in depth about commits and branches being sticky notes, which is, my term. And we just ended up talking about sticky notes and how branches are sticky notes on commits and the commit graph. And so we didn't get to in-depth branching, merging, and conflicts, things that happen to you at work when you're just so frustrated because you just want to check out another branch and Git is telling you, sorry, you can't do that because you've got to either stash your changes or you've got to discard them. And it drives you batty because you're saying, wait a second, I didn't have to do that last time I checked out code. Why? So let's talk about why. How come this time when I merged, I didn't have to do anything? And last time when I merged, it was conflict after conflict after conflict. Why? I don't understand the difference. And so we're going to try to do some of those things, and I hope that they help people go back to work and not be afraid of the next time they have to merge anything, because it can send shivers down your spine, right? So if you ever want to know what our schedule, we're trying to keep it up to date at Meetup. The best way to find us, the schedule is meetup.com, and just search for the Dev Talk Show. And that's next week. Going to be practical Git. Don't forget to follow our guest, Brian Manisi, on Twitter. Don't forget just Brian at Brian Manisi, right? Which we'll see in just a second. Everybody's Twitter handles right there. And Brian, thank you so much. I learned a ton.
Oh, this was great.
I loved this conversation. And
yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And the Dev Talk Show was born out of the parking lot conversation at Philly.net, and we just wanted to share it with the whole world. So that's why we're here.
Exactly.
So yeah, we will love to have you again to talk about Bicep more in depth, or really anything. Your expertise is always welcome. So
all right.
Rich, Andy, anything else, or are we all ready to go to bed here on the East Coast?
Yeah, it's just another thanks to the viewers, to the chatters, to the ones that didn't chat. Some people are just hanging out. That's cool too, right? Yep. Just thanks for being here. We know people are out there. We know people are watching and participating. It's fun for us. I learn stuff every show.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks, Brian.
Well, I think we've done
everybody. Yeah.
I think we've done it. That's a show. Thanks again. Wow, 2 hours. Can you believe it? We sure can talk a lot. Thanks, Brian, for all your expertise.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it. And we will see every one of you next time on the Dev Talk Show.